Welcome back to the Great American History class. In this episode, we're going to read through the notes for the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And these notes can be found at the bottom of the Great American History Schoology Account main page, and will help you better understand the sequence of events and the movie Son of the Morning Star. So, Battle of the Little Bighorn. We always, of course, have our notes in who, what, where, when, and why. So, the who, the people, the real life people that actually lived or died through these events, very important. And so, let's go through the who's who of the Battle of Little Bighorn. General George Armstrong Custer. Custer had become the youngest general in the Union Army during the Civil War, just the age of 23. He was at the Battle of Gettysburg at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, when General Lee surrendered his Confederate Army to General Grant, April the 9th, 1865. Following the Civil War, Custer was assigned to the Great Plains by the American Army. He didn't necessarily want to be there, but he did his duty. He would find himself involved in the Plains Indian Wars. In May of 1877, Custer would leave Fort Lincoln in North Dakota with the 7th Cavalry in search of the quote-unquote hostile Indians that were refusing to live on the government reservations in the Black Hills of the Dakota Territory. Custer and the 7th Cavalry would find a large Indian encampment in the valley of the Little Bighorn, and on June 25th, Custer would order an attack that would fail and become known as Custer's Last Stand, where he and at or near 265 members of the 7th Cavalry were killed in what was the Americans' largest military defeat to the Native American Indians in the field of battle. So that is General George Armstrong Custer. Number two, the 7th Cavalry. The 7th Cavalry is the military unit that Custer commanded and was defeated while suffering heavy casualties in the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Number three is Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull is the elder Indian chief that assembled a large Indian nation of different tribes that were refusing to follow the American governmental order to report to live on the reservations. These quote-unquote hostile Indians are estimated to have numbered about 10,000 Indians. Sitting Bull would sacrifice as he cut 50 pieces of flesh from each arm, and you'll see this in the movie. And he had a vision that the Bluecoats, that would be the American soldiers, would come into their camp and die. After the battlefield victory at the Little Bighorn, Sitting Bull would take a large number of the Indians into Canada with him, where they would live for about 5 years before he returned to America and would surrender in 1881. They were placed on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, with Sitting Bull and his son being shot and killed in their cabin one cold morning in 1890 by the Indian police, leading up to the events at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Number four, Crazy Horse. The young Indian warrior chief was with Sitting Bull and helped assemble with him a large Indian nation of about 10,000 Indians that were termed to be quote-unquote hostile, because, again, they refused to report to live on the reservational land as ordered by the American government and President Ulysses Sam Grant. After fighting bravely, leading the final assault on Custer and his soldiers at the Last Stand Hill, and attributed with killing up to as many 31 American soldiers during the Battle of Little Bighorn, Crazy Horse would not go to Canada, but he would stay in America and continue to fight. Shortly after, he would be captured and would surrender just a few months after the Battle of Little Bighorn. He surrendered about 1,000 Indians, and when he was taken and held as a prisoner at Fort Robinson in Nebraska, he would be bayoneted and killed by an American soldier as another Indian held him in his arms. Crazy Horse. You may have heard of the Crazy Horse Monument out in the Black Hills of South Dakota. There is a picture linked to the Crazy Horse Monument. Another thing about Crazy Horse is Crazy Horse refused to allow himself to be photographed, so there are no known photographs of Crazy Horse, no actual real life photographs known to be of Crazy Horse. The best that there is there's a sketch that was confirmed by his sister that was a good sketch that resembled Crazy Horse. Number 5, President Ulysses Sam Grant. Grant, of course, was the great Civil War general that had forced the surrender of Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, April 9, 1865. He was now the president, and the Grant administration had failed to honor the Black Hills of the Dakota Land Territory that was signed with the Indians. That land treaty, the Dakota Land Territory Treaty, was an agreement with President Grant, his administration, and the Indians that land was to forever belong to the Indians. But then gold was discovered in the Black Hills in 1874, and that changed the ballgame. The Grant administration then came up with an Indian policy that would require all Indians living in the area to report to live on reservations by January 31st, 1876, and if they did not, those Indians would be termed to be quote-unquote hostile. This would lead eventually to the battle and the defeat at the Battle of Little Bighorn. What happened? The president, Grant, and his administration had signed a land treaty agreement with the Native American Indians that the Black Hills of the Dakota Territory was to forever be their land, and the Indians considered it to be their sacred land. However, gold was discovered in the Black Hills in 1874 under a Custer expedition. This set off a Black Hills gold rush as more and more white settlers came into the Black Hills looking for gold. Eventually, the American government would not honor its Black Hills Land Treaty Dakota agreement with the Indians, and the President Grant administration would establish an Indian policy that required all the Indians living in the area to report to live on reservation lands by January 31st, 1876. Otherwise, they were termed by the government to be quote-unquote hostile Indians. It would be these hostile Indians that Custer and the 7th Cavalry would leave Fort Lincoln in search of in May of 1876, and the trail would lead them into the Valley of the Little Bighorn, where Custer and the 7th Cavalry would suffer the biggest American military defeat to the Indians on June 25th, 1876. Where? Fort Lincoln, which is located near present-day Bismarck, North Dakota, the capital city of North Dakota today, and also the Valley of the Little Bighorn, southeastern Montana. When? June 25th, 1876 is when the battle takes place. Custer and the 7th Cavalry left Fort Lincoln on May 17th, 1876. Why did it happen? The American government under President Ulysses Sam Grant had not honored the Black Hills of the Dakota Land Agreement with the Native American Indians after gold was discovered there in 1874. They ordered all of the Indians living in the area to report to live on the reservational lands. Led by Chief Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, a large number of Indians refused and were termed to be quote-unquote hostile Indians. It would be these hostile Indians that Custer and the 7th Cavalry would go in search of in the spring of 1876, and when they found the large military encampment in the Valley of the Little Bighorn, they would attack and be defeated in the battle on June 25th, 1876. So, the learning targets here are number 1, the President Grant administration ordered the Indians in the area to report to live on the reservational lands, and if they did not by January 31st, 1876, they would be termed to be quote-unquote hostile Indians, violent, dangerous Indians. Number 2, that ultimately learning target number 2 is that Custer and the 7th Cavalry would ultimately, after a month, find the Indians in the Valley of the Little Bighorn, and they would attack. And that attack would not be successful. Why? Basically, possibly 5 reasons why weren't they successful. Custer, because of his ego, refused to take a 2nd Cavalry unit with him. Number 2, he didn't take the Gatling guns with him, which was ultimately the most rapid-fire weapon of the time period. Number 3, He underestimated the size and strength of the Indian encampment against him. Number 4, he didn't use his calling card. He did not attack at dawn as the sun rose. And number 5, look for Major Reno, who's going to lead the initial charge, and Captain Benteen, 2 7th Cavalry officers that ultimately may have failed to support General Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn and Custer's Last Stand. It is the largest American military defeat to the Native American Indians, and from the other perspective, it is the largest Native American battle victory over the American military. Sitting Bull, after the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the elder Indian chief takes a large number of Indians up into Canada, where they remain for 5 years. When life becomes tough up there, they return back, and ultimately Sitting Bull surrenders them, and he himself is killed in the events leading up to Wounded Knee in 1890. And just a few months after the Battle at Little Bighorn, Crazy Horse is going to be captured. He's going to be taken prisoner, and he is going to be bayoneted, stabbed in the back, as he is being put into a prison jail cell at Fort Robinson, Nebraska. So, a very interesting sequence of events, very important to American history, and ultimately America has some difficult moments in its American history, and of course we have gone through slavery and Uncle Tom's Cabin, and ultimately the treatment and or mistreatment of the Native American Indians, another difficult moment in American history. So ultimately, Son of the Morning Star, considered the best book on Custer and the Battle at Little Bighorn. The movie version is very well done also. So hopefully you have read through the notes here and are learning something in regards to George Armstrong Custer, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and the Battle at Little Bighorn.